Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. Well, it's time to clear this bed. And earlier in the summer, I planted a group of 3 vegetables, all sharing the same space, known as the 3 sisters. And that was sweet corn, underplanted with French beans and courgettes. And the sweet corn were fantastic. It's a variety called Swift. And I have to say, they were the best I've ever grown. So that was a success. The beans were good without being absolutely spectacular. In fact, there's still quite a few on there, which I'll take off before chucking them on the compost heap. But the courgettes were, quite frankly, a disappointment. Nothing like the quantity that one normally gets. This courgette was a variety called Tromboncino. But you can see it grew pretty well. I think the problem was likely to be the fact that I was cramming too much into a raised bed. These raised beds drain really well, but of course courgettes like lots of moisture. So that the sweet corn and the beans were taking up too much moisture, not leaving enough for the courgettes really to develop as they might have done. So that's a lesson learned. If you're going to do the 3 sisters, give them a little bit more room than I've done here. I shall leave this foxglove that's self-seeded in the corner there, because I always like to have a few flowers popping up, unbidden but very welcome, in amongst the veg. Coming up on today's programme, after finally having the opportunity to get to grips with his own back garden, Nick shares his design tips for making the most of a compact plot.
If you're putting together a border in a really small garden, then every single plant has really got to count.
Jo meets the broadcaster Kate Garraway, who, along with her children, found solace in her garden in the darkest of times.
You can't think short-term in a garden. You have to plan. You have to have hope. You have to invest in a future. You don't plant something unless you believe it's going to come up. So by planting something and believing Derek will see it when it comes up, that gives us a sense of future.
And I'll be planting up my orchard beds with a selection of shade-loving biennials. Right, well, having cleared away the 3 sisters and dug over the bed, and actually I've added a little bit of compost, it should now be ready for the next planting. And this will be elephant garlic. And garlic is one of those crops that needs vernalization to grow well. Vernalization just means a cold period, which triggers growth. In the case of garlic, it's about a month below 10 degrees. Now, to guarantee that, the earlier you put it in the ground, the more chance you've got. So I like to start planting garlic by the end of October. But failing that, certainly by Christmas. And it's a good idea to do it now while the ground is easy to work. However, I grow less and less conventional garlic nowadays because we find that elephant garlic does the job perfectly. Now, elephant garlic has simply enormous cloves. 1 clove of elephant garlic is almost as big as a whole bulb of some of the more conventional types. And although they're so big, they're actually very mild. It grows very well, it's easy to grow, and it stores beautifully. This will store for up to a year if you keep it cool and dark. Make a decent-sized hole. So that goes in there quite deep. It's a bulb, and as a rule of thumb, it needs its own depth above it before soil level. 1 in the middle, pointy end up, pop it in like that, and another over on this side. Now, like all garlic, it likes quite a rich, well-drained soil. It needs spacing rather wider than most garlic, so I like to give it at least a foot apart. Now, these will grow much better in a bed than they will in a container, but it doesn't mean to say that you can't grow them in containers. I've grown garlic in pots and they work perfectly well. Now, all I have to do is rake this over, which will cover the bulbs. They don't need watering because there's moisture in the soil, and the one thing I can be absolutely certain of is there will be plenty of rain over the next few weeks. You should start to see the first shoots appear in about a month's time. There we go, underneath that seemingly empty surface is the first of next summer's harvest, just waiting to burst out of the ground, and because it's elephant garlic, to do so in grand style. Now, we paid a visit to Nick in his garden at home, and over the last few years, he's been so busy on other people's projects that he hadn't had time to give his own garden the attention that he felt it deserved. Well, lockdown changed that, so for the first time, he was able to get stuck in and get going with some projects that he had had on the back burner for ages.
Back in March, as the country went into lockdown, in a very bare and barren-looking plot, I put spade to ground for the first time. By the end of April, most of the clearance had been done, and I was able to focus on the design and, of course, the planting. Nearly 5 months on, and it is absolutely fantastic to finally have my own garden. It's a relatively small space, so I've employed various different design devices to try and make the most of it. One of the classic things I've done is to place the glass house over here, and it effectively divides up the garden, creating a series of what I like to call flirtations and revelations. In other words, suggesting that there's something that lies beyond. You can end up making a small garden feel quite big. The other device that I've employed is the pergola behind me here. And of course, growing plants in this way means that they make the most of the vertical space. But it has the dual advantage that all the foliage across the top of the pergola starts to tie into those trees outside of my garden, so I can borrow bits of the surrounding landscape and effectively nick my neighbour's trees. All those weeks back, I was determined to try something I hadn't done much before. And at that uncertain time, it seemed crucial: growing vegetables. And in fact, it was going to be the primary focus of my new garden. But it didn't quite work out like that. My passion for ornamental plants has meant that the vegetables have taken just a little bit of a backseat. My brassicas are okay, but they're a bit like my school reports. Could do better. I've had a good harvest of beans, though. And my tomatoes are fab. But as for my potato patch, the battle with the bindweed lasted so long that I missed the planting season. But I've now landscaped the area, you've guessed it, with ornamentals. If you're putting together a border in a really small garden, then every single plant has really got to count. And you need to make sure you've got the right mix that's going to give you a succession of colour and interest over as many months as possible. And I've got a bit of a recipe that can help you do that. So, to start with, you need to put in the long-flowering perennials. Now, there's two right beside me here that are incredibly useful. This geranium, which flowers for 6 to 7 months. And then this perennial wallflower, this erysimum. And again, this flowers even more, probably up to about 9 months. The second component you need to think about are successional plants. In other words, plants that you grow in association with each other. So the Salvia amistad is looking fabulous at the moment, but about 6 weeks ago, it wasn't even in bloom. However, at the start of the season, I planted a mass of orange lilies underneath it, so they were looking fantastic. Just as they finished, of course, the Salvia came into bloom. I cut back the lilies, and it kept the colour coming. And then the third component for creating a great successional border is the slot-in plants. they tend to be annuals, and I've grown several in the glasshouse this year, which I've slotted into the front of the border as earlier flowering species have finished. So 2 examples of that are this Cerinthe, just here, just pushing into flower. I put this in about a month ago. And then running all the way through the borders, I've got this lovely Tropiolum. It's got this fantastic variegated foliage, and it just weaves its way through everything. With these 3 simple planting strategies, if you follow them, you'll have months and months of colour in your garden. Another good ploy is to take cuttings of plants which may not survive the winter outdoors. This Augeranthemum is a case in point. So as an insurance policy, I'm cutting just below the leaf nodes, trimming the foliage, and then potting them in a light compost where they'll root. I'm going to keep these damp, or they could even sit in a propagator and just stay nice and moist, and in 3 or 4 weeks' time they will have rooted through. I can pot them up and there'll be plants ready to go into the garden next summer. Now, I might not have been hugely productive in terms of the amount of fruit and veg that I've produced outside, but in the glasshouse I've tried out a few unusual edibles. Now, one of them is this, the lemongrass. Native to India, lemongrass has a lemony scent and the stems have a citrus flavour, which is regularly used in Thai food. Now, over here, this is Salvia hispanica, otherwise known as chia. Now, it comes from Mexico, and the seeds are high in omega-3, which is quite unusual for plants. And it also has a good range of trace elements, so it's a really good, nutritious plant. Now, you can put them on top of breads that you bake, you can mix it into biscuits, or one of the ways you can treat them is to start out with the raw seed, like this, and then soak them in milk or a milk alternative or even yogurt. And what you wind up with is chia pudding, which is this extraordinary looking stuff. It's a little bit like frog spawn. I'll give it a try. I have to say it's actually really pleasant. It's kind of smooth and silky. The gel that's inside the seed has come out and surrounded it, so it makes each individual seed much larger. I reckon it's actually quite tasty. Now, the third of my unusual edibles is this. It's Spilanthes, or commonly known as the electric daisy. Now, it's just been licensed for use in dentistry as an anaesthetic, but historically it's been most commonly used as a food flavouring. It is said to initially have a lemony flavour, quite a strong lemon flavour, and then to make you salivate, and then finally it's supposed to give you a sort of a mild electrical sensation in your mouth. I'm just about to try it out. And let's have a go. Wow. Wow. Well, I know why it got its name. That was intense and unique and lemony and slightly feel like I'm being electrocuted at the moment, but yeah, I think it's good. Phenomenal flavour, but perhaps best used in moderation. From the glasshouse to the summer house, the beds to the borders, my new garden has taken on a life of its own and become a huge part of mine.
Nick has made a lovely garden, and what's so impressive is that he's created a sense of profusion and substance and variety and longevity, yet used very few plants. And it's that skill in expertly selecting your plants that is the key, I think. This is a tray of foxgloves that I've grown from seed. And this is a very good time of year to be planting out biennials like foxgloves. But first, we're going to visit one of your gardens. And Simone and her daughter Alessandra from West Sussex have sent us a film celebrating the seed swap that they've set up from rather an unusual base.
My name is Simone Graham, and I formed a community group to restore and repurpose this beautiful old K6 phone box into a seed swap. It's for the local community. If they have surplus seed or if they have any seed they've gathered from their garden, they can bring it here and swap it for some seed that somebody else has left. So come inside and have a look.
I'm going to swap some seeds today. So I've got some...
Was that a foxglove?
Yeah, foxglove and some broccoli. So foxgloves go in flowers A and F. Right there. I'm going to choose this one.
Yeah.
Maybe this. And then one of these.
The box has been a real hub for the local community. We've got different community groups involved. We've got the local men's shed who has fitted out the bookcase. We've got a local running group who does a phone box dash on a Friday night between the different phone boxes that have been refurbished in town. And we've got the local horticultural groups involved as well, which is really great. So if you have an old K6 phone box in your neighbourhood, or you've got a corner of a store or anything, to set up a seed swap is a really great and easy thing to do.
Although there have been lots of seed swaps around for quite a long time, Simone and Alessandra have brought real charm and wit to it. And wouldn't it be lovely if every village and town and city in the country could use all the thousands of old call boxes for seed swaps? It's a lovely idea. I've got some plants here, some of which I've grown from seed and some of which I have bought. These are biennials. I've got 3 different types: foxgloves, honesty, and sweet rocket. And the nature of a biennial is that the seed falls, germinates quite quickly, grows into a small plant, and then overwinters without growing any more. But come spring, they're in a really good place with a strong root system to grow fast, flower, and then the seed falls and the cycle repeats itself. So it's a little late to sow seed now, but you can buy plants from garden centres, and now is the perfect time to plant out the young biennials so they're ready to grow and flower where you want them to in your garden next spring. This is probably the best known biennial there is, which is foxglove. However, this particular foxglove is not like the ordinary digitalis, the purpurea, with these lovely purple, pinky bells of flowers. This is a variety called Sutton's apricot. And a really good apricot is rare, but I treasure it. I've sown a few trays of them, and I'm going to be planting them all the way down these borders. So with any luck, next spring, they will set a colour tone when they flower in May and June that will be really special. It's all right, there's a good girl, you stay there. So if I put that there, and then another back in here next to this hydrangea. Foxgloves are essentially woodland plants. They grow best in clearings and glades and on the edge of woods. So if you've got shrubs or small trees, they are perfect for planting in amongst them. Now, I've also got this, which is sweet rocket. Sweet rocket comes with a range of colours from white through shades of purpley pink through to a deep mauve. And they're lovely. But what makes them even better is that whatever colour they are deliciously fragrant, particularly in the evening. So this can go in here, and I'll put another one there too. And the final one is Honesty, which has lovely mauvey purple flowers, fantastic for pollinating insects in spring. But it's grown as much for its seed heads as its flowers, because when the flowers are over, the seed heads are these silvery, two-dimensional discs, and they will last right through winter. So all in all, this is a plant that gives you a double hit. Really good flowers and fabulous seed heads, and it will grow perfectly well in light shade. This can come back in amongst there. And one at the back there too. Right, let's start planting. You stay there, Nell. You let me do all the work. You rest. You see, if I could train you to use a trowel, you could plant them too, couldn't you? I'm sure Patty would. Well, there is no secret to these. You simply make a hole and plant them so that the level that are in the pot is the same as the soil. It's a good idea to plant biennials in groups. However, avoid doing rows or lines or even grids, because the art of making borders like this work, particularly if there's dappled shade and a mixture of trees and shrubs and annuals and perennials, is to make it look as though it is as natural as possible. We've now got a chance to have another look at the orchid collection at Kew and join its curator, Bala Kampali.
I'm a botanical horticulturist working for the last 13 years. My role involves looking after one of the largest collections in the tropical nursery, which is orchid collections in the orchid unit. Orchids belong to one of the largest flowering plant families in the world, with over 25,000 species and still growing. When I was a child, I used to hear about my grandfather's interest in growing plants. He always used to collect seeds from various parts of India and then grow them, and he used to label them very meticulously and look after them. And I started paying interest in plant life, and it became my biggest passion since I was a child. My job is not just creating beautiful displays, it's a lot more than that. My work also involves working with different scientists from all around the world. For example, the orchid species here are used for various taxonomic studies, conservation, research, educating the next generation horticulturists, public displays, festivals, and I'm proud to be a part of it day to day. Princess of Wales Conservatory, this exhibit reminds me of my home because it shows how orchids naturally grow on their host trees in the wild. Although orchids are distributed in many parts of the world, India has some fabulous species. For example, this one belongs to the genus Thunia. This genus is widespread from Indian subcontinent to China and peninsular Malaysia. And this has a very unique type of pseudobulbs, look like canes, and the leaves are lush green when they're growing, and they spread in alternate fashion. I saw them growing, hundreds and hundreds of them, on a big branch of tree, and all the pseudobulbs are leaning, facing the ground, and it looks amazing to see them all at one place. Many of us know what these are. These are the orchids which are commonly seen in the supermarkets, garden centers. We buy them to decorate our windowsills. What many of us don't know is these come from a very humble little plant which is called Phalaenopsis pulcherrima. Phalaenopsis pulcherrima is a particular species which is seen in northeast India in the state Assam, and they spread up to Hainan in China. And those tiny little beauties are bred over and over and over until they get the desired size and shape and the longevity of the flowers to produce beauties like these hybrid Phalaenopsis or moth orchid. I love my job because I can always say that when I come to work, I can always say, this is my office. So this passion, it never stops. My aspirations are to expand the living orchid collections. And in that course, I will learn more about these critically endangered or very important orchid collections. At the same time, I can pass on my knowledge to the next as many future generations as possible.
I think what is really important about what Bala is saying is that knowledge, all this incredible depth of knowledge and wisdom that people like her have amassed, should be passed on to the next generation, because knowledge can go extinct just as plants can. Now, I've got growing here in the copse nothing as extraordinary or rare as any orchid, but are unusual. And these are colchicums. This is Colchicum speciosum album. And they're great big flowers, but they don't have any foliage that you can see, so they rise out of the ground unadorned, which of course is why they're called naked ladies. In fact, they do have foliage, but it never appears at the same time as the flower. The foliage comes first in early and midsummer and then dies right back. And then in autumn, the flowers appear. And the extraordinary thing is that although I know they're here, there is something startling about their appearance every year. Now, for all of us, this has been an extraordinary and difficult year. But for some, it has been a lot tougher than for others. And this is certainly true of the broadcaster and journalist Kate Garraway. But throughout remarkably troubling times, her garden has remained a constant source of strength and comfort. And Joe went to visit her.
Over the past few months, we've all been through some very challenging and difficult times. And up and down the country, I think we've realised that green spaces and gardens are more vital than ever. Today, I'm visiting TV and radio presenter Kate Garraway in her London garden. A space that has become a lifeline for her family.
So here you go.
Wow,
Step to a
lovely big garden for London. It's
really
big.
we're so lucky. We are so lucky. We bought the house, Derek and I, for the garden. So we've been here 4 years, and I know you're probably thinking we haven't done much, but it was literally covered in brambles. Covered in those reeds. I don't quite know what they are, but you might be able to
the
tell.
flag iris.
It is flag iris. I've always called them flag iris, and
Yeah.
everyone said they're not sure.
Well,
Oh,
yellow,
okay.
big yellow.
They're big yellow
yeah,
flowers.
flag iris.
So it was covered in that. But what we did have was all these incredible trees.
Yeah.
Apple trees, pear trees, green gage everywhere. So
Yeah,
we
lovely.
probably
So
got
it might have been an
5
orchard or something here.
I wonder if it is, because lots of the gardens in the road, everyone said they've got lots and lots of fruit trees in here. The first job really was just to clear everything and see what was there. And for the first year, we just watched to see what would come up.
Ah, that's exactly what you should do. I mean, we
Yeah.
always say you should do that, but no one ever does it.
Everywhere roses came, it felt a little bit that first year like being in Sleeping Beauty, and we were the prince sort of hacking our way through the thorns, and emerged were all these incredible roses, and they were just everywhere, and it was so beautiful. But it's obviously been an odd year
Yeah.
for the world, and probably, you know, very directly, personally for me. So
Well, your world's been turned upside down.
Derek, who didn't have the symptoms of a cough and a temperature, suddenly at the end of March just said, I feel really unwell. And we had 24 hours of thinking, what is this, and calling doctors, and then eventually the doctor said, call an ambulance. So this was end of March. He got into the ambulance, went to hospital, was found to have COVID. And then suddenly it just went whoom. And it just took hold and swept through his body, touching every part of his body. And he was fighting to breathe. And then, you know, one Sunday morning, they called me on the phone, on speakerphone, and said, we're going to have to put him into an induced coma. And he's just not woken up. I can remember the week before he got sick, he was saying, I think we're going to have a lockdown. I think the schools are going to close, and I think we need to think about it. And in a strange kind of way, we were almost rather looking forward to the idea of just breathing out, which I think has been the discovery for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So, just before all the garden centres shut, Darcy's my daughter, she's 14 and Billy's 10, suddenly said, we should grow our own vegetables, Mum, because at least then we'll survive. And I said, great idea, let's do that. And I think for her, it was about something positive to do.
Yeah.
It was like, I can't help Mum, I can't help Dad, I know what's going on, sort of, but I also can't do anything about it. You feel so helpless. And it then meant together, we nurtured this. And so we've had cabbages, we've eaten radishes, we've had raspberries, we've had blackberries. This became like our saviour, really, because you ask a teenager, how do you feel about the fact Dad might die? Sorry, it's hard to even say it, isn't it? How do you feel about the fact Dad might die? And they just say, okay, they don't, it's too big.
Yeah.
It's too big a thing to take on. But when you're sitting there sort of like planting radishes, she would start asking me questions, and that allowed us to talk about it.
But it's also so positive.
It's doing something really positive, and I was so proud of her for that. And I could share things with her because I could see how much she wanted to know.
Turn the compost over in with the other soil.
It's an activity, and it's an activity that's about life. It was rather sad because the radishes came. They're one of Derek's favourite vegetables, and we ate them, and he still wasn't better. So I then thought, we've got to go more long-term here. So we were planting things that were going to take longer to bear fruit, and I'd say, well, Dad will be better by then, and let's hope he'll be better by then. And of course, now that it's been so long, we've now got a huge basket of bulbs. And I was like, right, let's plant these so that when Dad comes home, the place will be full of colour. When you're living day to day on a knife edge, doing something that gives you a future just helps a sense of progress, really, where there actually is none in the direct situation.
That's good, isn't it?
I'd often get a phone call at midnight saying we're not sure if he's going to make it through the night. And you can't sleep after that. Yeah. So I was helpless. So I come out into the garden at 1 o'clock in the morning and do random mad things like water his favourite plants. It doesn't take a trained psychologist to know that by watering them and not letting them die, I sort of felt like I was doing something to keep the hope alive and to keep the spirit of him alive. And I feel like nature paid me back because they then just grew the highest they've ever grown, and they flowered beautifully with wonderful yellow flowers. These are the reeds, the flag irises that Derek loves, and even though I've cleared a lot from the lawn, I wanted to keep them here because they're the memories of the house as we first bought it. But after they've flowered, they are basically just sort of reeds, aren't they? So last year, when it was really wet in the autumn, I put in some allium bulbs, and everybody said they wouldn't survive because it's so clay and wet.
Yeah.
And they have been amazing because they just kind of came up through just as the flag irises went. They were huge. I mean, the seed heads now are still beautiful, I think, but they were massive, big purple flowers with the lovely kind of pinky stems. And they just suddenly made it wonderful. And yeah, I feel like those alliums fought back to make the reeds work against everyone's advice, and I love that. I'd often have to be up all night, still do sometimes, talking to Derek in his state on FaceTime. So they'd set up an iPad
Okay.
and I could talk to him on FaceTime. Obviously, he can't respond,
Yeah.
but I can
Yeah.
talk to him.
But
And
would
I
you
come-
do that from the garden? From the garden? So
Yeah.
okay.
I'd sit in the garden and do that and talk about the things that he loved. It's just a lovely thing to do. And then also sometimes where there were moments when I was really overwhelmed by fear and uncertainty and, you know, what life was going to be. And I would literally just focus on the movement of the leaves and try and stop the adrenaline and calm me. It's kind of mindfulness, and I think the garden is very effective at that. And I think being in nature, whatever patch of ground you can get to and doing that is really good for any stress. And I think it's made a world of difference. It's been the most important space for us. It's been a place to find joy. It's been a place to find hope. It's been a place to go a bit crazy and feel a bit unleashed in a stifling physical and emotional time that we've all lived through. It just gives you that sense of positive moving forward that I think only a garden can do, really. You can't think short-term in a garden. You have to plan. You have to have hope. You have to invest in a future. You don't plant something unless you believe it's going to come up. So by planting something and believing Derek will see it when it comes up, that gives us a sense of future.
Well, obviously, all of us send our warmest wishes to Kate, her family, and to Derek. And it's profoundly moving and inspirational to hear how the garden has been this source of comfort and inspiration for her. But it's actually a familiar tale. I've heard people who seemingly are coping with terrible things have found the garden has really helped. Gardens can't make our problems go away, they can't solve them, but they can help us to deal with them. And if it gives us hope and faith in a better future, that surely is as important as any other aspect of gardens or gardening. I know that for some people, February is the cruelest month of the lot. But as a gardener, there are plants that you can plant now that will brighten the darkest winter's day. And these are the jewel-like little bulbs that are small, but have really rich colours. You can put them in a window box or a roof garden or a balcony or outside in a tiny little yard, and they will still perform. Now, I'm going to start with an iris called Harmony, which is a lovely, rich cobalt blue. And it's got an egg yolk yellow flare on its fall. The fall is the petal that drops down in all irises. Now, these irises need really good drainage, so your compost needs to be right. What I've got here is my basic coir and bark-based compost, mixed with a bit of perlite and a bit of leaf mould. So I put 2 scoops of that in. Now I'm going to mix that with grit. And you need at least a third of the volume with grit. Actually, I like to do a bit more than that and do almost more like 50%. If you can't get grit, perlite will do the job, but grit is absolutely ideal. Mix it up. Like that. Half fill it. Then you can see that these are plump little bulbs that almost look like nuts. And of course, you always plant them pointy head up. And we can put these about an inch apart. And what I always do is make a ring right round the edge of the pot and then another ring in the gaps. Now cover it over with a layer of this gritty compost so they're fully protected. And then what I do is put a layer of grit on the top. Doesn't need to be much. When you have these outside and they're flowering in February, if there is rain or if you water them, if you just have compost, you can get splash and the petals can get stained with the compost, whereas if you have the grit, that doesn't happen. The best place to put this is outside, exposed to the elements, but covered by glass from rain, because they like to be cold in winter. But if they get too wet, then they can rot. So those are the iris. Now, I've also got some miniature daffodils, a variety called Hawera. Hawera are multi-headed, and they're primrose yellow, and they have got wonderful fragrance. So we'll do the same technique of going around the outside. When you're planting bulbs in pots, cram them in. You want a really strong display, and then cover those over. There we go. Daffodils are less sensitive to wet than iris, but still put them somewhere where they won't sit in a puddle. And then, when you're ready, when you see the buds start to appear, move the pot somewhere where you can really appreciate them. Now, that's fine if they're very small pots like this, but when you've got lots of pots and some of them are big and heavy, moving them around for any reason can be a bit of a problem. However, we've been sent a film where that particular problem has an ingenious solution.
My name is Jan. I live in Tredegar, which is in South Wales. This is my garden, and since COVID, I planted about 100 containers, but I want to show you what I invented. Because I like to have my plants right against my window, but I need to clean my windows. So what I did, I had 2 pallets, which I painted, and put wheels on, so that when I want to clean my windows, all I have to do is this. And then I can clean my windows easily and then put them all back. The other thing I've done, I wanted some height. So I bought a hairdresser stand for colours, which I planted up the pots, and I've got a bit of height and aspect. Also, because I can't sit in the sun, and I don't always want to sit by my patio umbrella, I bought a patio base, and I stuck it onto a piece of wood with some wheels, and it's now portable. So I can sit where I want to in the shade.
I love the way that gardeners like Jan all over the country have ingenuity that combines with just a sheer love of their plants. Now, these dahlias were almost rejects. This bed here is composed of plants that were either too small to plant out in the jewel garden, and we didn't think they would cope in the hurly-burly of the borders, or there were ones that we'd lost the label and we weren't quite sure what colour they would be. Well, all of them have done better than any in the jewel garden. They've absolutely loved it in these beds. And that's because they are grown in open space. They've got light, they've got air, they've been planted in rows quite widely apart in really rich, well-drained soil, and you can see they've romped away. So next year, I'm actually going to fill these beds just with dahlias. And these all came from tubers, but this little patch here is one packet of seeds called Bishop's Children. They're all offspring of the Bishop of Landa, sown in March, grown on and planted out. Now, they were planted out just to bulk up and maybe give us a few flowers at the end of the year, but these too have been flowering like mad since early August. Now, when you grow dahlias from seed, you don't quite know how they're all going to turn out, but one or two of them are really beautiful. Have a look at these here. Look at that. That is a really nice dahlia. I like the way the petals are spaced. I like the colour. It shows you that dahlias can and perhaps should be raised from seeds as well as tubers. Now, dahlias can't be kept out over winter here because they hate the combination of wet and cold, but we've got the chance to revisit the garden of Louise Dow in Sandwich in Kent, where the weather is a lot milder, her garden is sheltered, and as a result, she has got a subtropical paradise.
If I'm told I can't grow it, I'm more likely to have a go at growing it. I see it as a challenge. I live here with my partner, Steve. We're both professional gardeners. Steve's really busy at work. This is really my baby at home. The front garden's very traditional. The back garden, in contrast, is full of jungly exotics. To create the jungle effect, we've used some huge plants in here for an architectural look. This is Canna Imanii. I love this canna, and I wouldn't be without it. It's a definite must-have for me. So the back garden is about 22 by 17 metres. Because the space is quite small, we've decided to break it up so that you can't see the whole plot from one vision. You keep going around a corner, around the path, and something else appears. Pathways have been put in because we wanted to create that jungle effect, to feel like you're actually in a jungle, and the plants that you can get up and touch them, things like the Eupatorium capillifolium. You just got to give it a stroke every time I go past it. This here is our cordyline. It is the only original plant in the garden. So here's the cordyline with its house plants hanging on it. They come out for their summer holiday, the house plants. And some of the Spanish moss. Lovely rippled bark on it. It's very tactile. There's some bromeliads as well. So this is a Missia zygomerus. It's a member of the pea family. It's a hardy herbaceous perennial for us here, but not necessarily for the rest of the country. It's quite a nice open habit to it, so I always grow something round its bottom to cover up its bare bottoms. I don't like seeing any soil, so this is Irisine herbstii and Panicum frosted explosion grown in here with it. The garden primarily is a foliage garden, but we like to add a little zing of colour just to break it up, but not overly flowery in the garden. This is a fimbriated dahlia. And most of our colour choices in the back garden are hot pinks and oranges. We're actually a lot milder than the rest of the country here, so this is our place to experiment and test the limits of some of the hardiness of things. This is Fuchsia denticulata. It's not known to be completely hardy, but now I've built up some stocks from cuttings, I'm going to leave some out this year to see how it gets on. We try things even when technically they wouldn't work in the area. I don't always stick to the rules, and I try it. Until you've tried it in your own garden, there's so many varying factors that you don't necessarily know if it will or won't work. Have a go, don't be frightened of the plants. One of my favourite moments of the garden, actually, is in the mornings when I get up and look out of the bathroom window. And I really enjoy it from there because I can't get close enough to start seeing things that I think need doing. when I'm out in the garden and I sit down and I jump up because there's something that I can see that nobody else would be bothered about, but I like to tinker a lot.
Well, I do exactly know that feeling that Louise talks about, both of the desire to tinker whenever you're out in the garden, and also that first view of the garden. You look down, whether it be from the bathroom or the bedroom, and you can see all that's good and you can't see any of the bad. And sometimes that's when the garden is at its very best. Now, I can't pretend that any grass here at Longmeadow is worth any kind of inspection. It is low quality, and in a way that's deliberate, because I got rid of any lawns that we had, and wherever possible, I've tried to change short mown grass to long grass, which is brilliant for wildlife and also a really good basis for introducing bulbs and wildflowers. But it doesn't matter whether you have a narrow grass path or a great big lawn that you want to look as good as possible, because now, in October, is the time to give it a little bit of TLC to set it up for next spring. And good grass grows best with really good drainage and lots of water. So the first thing to do is to get rid of all the dead growth that has accumulated over the summer, and it could be moss, it could be thatch, and just scratch it out with a wire rake. And rake it vigorously. It will look a bit rough for a few weeks, but the grass will quickly start to grow back, and then next spring will grow much better as a result. Having given it a good scratch and got rid of all the loose, dead material, the next thing to do is to deal with compaction. The easiest way is simply with a garden fork, and just push it down and wiggle it about. And you do this about every 6 inches, and you can feel the compaction breaking up. And if you've got a relatively small area, this is a very good way of doing it. Climate change, which is bringing us milder autumns, means the grass goes on growing often well into November. So more and more of us are cutting our lawns and paths for longer. But it is important to remember that by now you should be raising your blades. You don't want to cut it as short as you do in midsummer. It should go into winter, ideally about 1 inch long, which is quite long, and that will help the roots. And then next spring, look better when you give it its first cut. Now, it's time to see the last of this week's films that you've sent in from your gardens. And it comes from a chef who was unable to work during lockdown. However, he channeled his passion for food into creating a beautiful and productive garden.
Hi, this is Saifur from Essex. I work as a chef. Cooking good food and bringing a smile to others is my passion. Since April, I'm not working. Beginning, I was a bit shocked, but I didn't waste my time. I used my backyard for making a vegetable garden. With a good care, you can do everything. From chili to eggplant, everything is possible with a good care. Many people ask me, what's the secret for growing my vegetable? Let me tell you, all my kitchen waste I use for making good organic compost. You can make whatever you want with your backyard garden vegetable. This year, I'm growing over 20 types of vegetable and at least 21 different types of chili. It was my great pleasure to share my all vegetable with my neighbors, friends, relatives, and elderly people. Many people ask me, do I have a greenhouse? I told them I don't have any greenhouse. I have a green positive energy, which I use for making a good garden.
If my vegetables were as good as that, I would be very proud. I've got here, and I don't know if Cypher grows this, Mitsuna, both green and purple. And I intended to plant them out earlier, but there were no beds free, and I potted them on. I always grow Mitsuna because it is a really good winter vegetable because it's lovely in salads, quite like rocket. The purple Mitsuna is slightly more mustardy than the green, but they're both brassicas, both oriental vegetables. They don't need much protection in winter. I normally cloche them or fleece them if the temperature drops below about -7, -8, and I know for many parts of the country it never gets that low. And if you give them reasonable soil, reasonable drainage, they will grow and you can keep cutting them and they will grow back. They are a cut and come again veg. A slug has been having a little nibble at these, but by and large they don't like the mustard flavour of it. Now, while I'm planting these out, here are your jobs for the weekend. If you pot up hyacinths now, they should be flowering for Christmas and the New Year. Be sure to buy specially prepared bulbs. Use a very free-draining compost and leave the snouts or the pointy ends sticking out into the air. Keep them lightly moist and put them in a dark place for the next few months. And then, when there is a pale shoot about an inch or so long, bring them out into light and heat, and they will flower a few weeks later. Before you fill your greenhouse up with plants to protect them over the winter months, it's a good idea to give the glass a clean. As well as improving hygiene, this will maximize all the available winter sunlight. You can get an earlier crop of broad beans by sowing some now. Choose a hardy variety like Aqua Dolce and sow them as you would your main crop, with each bean about 6 to 9 inches apart and in rows. Cover them over and label them. And the whole point is that they will get an early start as soon as the weather warms up next spring. If we haven't visited the Paradise Garden very much over the last few weeks, it's because it hardly needs any gardening. It's really the easiest part of the garden to attend to. Everything just does its own thing quite happily. The pots need watering and feeding every week, but other than that, that's it. And as long as the mild weather continues, the verbena and the gara will go on flowering. And I may not do much gardening here, but I do spend quite a lot of time just quietly enjoying it. But no more time for today, I'm afraid. We'll be back next week, but at 9 o'clock. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Growing veg can be tricky. My carrots were testament to that. All the advice you need in GW's Veg Almanac available now. Made on Merseyside, but how did 4 teenage boys become international pop stars? Journey with the Beatles on BBC4 at 11:20. Jules Holland hosts Sam Smith next.